"The pool heater's broken," she said through chattering teeth, and I knew I should have just nodded politely. "Hello, I'm James. I'm 25, working remotely while house-sitting for my uncle. And I've always been the guy who watches from windows. Not the neighbor who introduces himself. Not the type to offer help to strangers, but I notice things. I pay attention. Especially to women who move through gardens with unconscious grace. I grew up in Portland, drifted to this suburb after my startup collapsed. Nothing ever happened. Here, just perfect lawns, pristine pools, and me working alone in my uncle's home office. Which is probably why what happened that freezing Friday night still makes my chest tight. She was 49, recently divorced, shivering by her pool. In a swimsuit. I was about to change everything with 7 words, but before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I hadn't planned on becoming the kind of person who watches his neighbors, but 3 weeks of working from my uncle's home office had turned me into exactly that. Uncle Paul's business trips usually lasted a month or 2, and he'd asked me to house-sit while I figured out my next move after the startup collapse. The arrangement worked perfectly. I could do my freelance design work from anywhere with Wi-Fi, and his suburban sanctuary offered the kind of peace I hadn't known I needed. The house itself was exactly what you'd expect from a successful bachelor in his 50s. Clean lines, modern furniture, and a view of meticulously maintained lawns that stretched toward a community of identical pools. But it was the window of the home office that changed everything. That's where I first saw her. She lived in the house directly across the shared fence line, and I noticed her on my second morning there. The spring sunshine caught the silver strands threading through her dark hair, which she usually wore in a loose bun at the nape of her neck. I guessed she was around 49, though there was something timeless about the way she moved through her garden, tending to plants I couldn't name with unconscious grace. You know those moments when you catch yourself doing something you hadn't meant to do? That's how it started. I'd be in the middle of a project, and my eyes would drift to the window, drawn to her presence like a compass finding north. She had this way of humming while she worked, not quite a tune, just contentment made audible. Sometimes she'd be on her phone, pacing the garden paths while she talked. Her laughter would carry across the fence, rich and genuine, becoming the soundtrack to my afternoons. I found myself timing my coffee breaks to coincide with her gardening schedule, though I never let myself acknowledge that's what I was doing. Just being observant, I'd tell myself, even as I memorized the pattern of her days. Morning coffee on her back porch, reading something on her tablet. Gardening in the late afternoon when the sun was gentler. Evening walks that started just as the streetlights buzzed to life. I wasn't looking for connection when I came here. After the startup crashed, I deliberately stepped back from everything. Relationships, networking events, even most of my social media. But there was something about her that made isolation feel like a choice I might want to reconsider. The days fell into a rhythm. I'd work on my freelance projects, design logos and websites for clients who never knew I was staring out windows between revisions. She'd move through her world next door, unaware she'd become part of mine. The distance between us was small enough that I could sometimes catch the scent of her flowers, but far enough that our lives remained safely separate, until Friday came, and with it an unexpected shift in the weather. I woke to news alerts about a 20-degree temperature drop heading our way. The meteorologist called it a rare late-spring cold snap, but all I could think about were the delicate plants she'd been nurturing for weeks. I watched her that morning, earlier than usual, as she hurried through her garden with protective sheets. Her breath made small clouds in the suddenly cool air, and her usual fluid movements had an urgency I hadn't seen before. The weather system promised to disrupt the careful patterns we'd both settled into, though neither of us could know exactly how the weekend stretched ahead, unusual in its uncertainty. I found myself wondering if her garden would survive the cold, if she had enough covers for all her plants, if the peaceful routines I'd grown accustomed to watching would weather this unexpected change. I hadn't planned on becoming invested, in a stranger's garden, just like I hadn't planned on becoming the kind of person who watches his neighbors. But here I was, checking the forecast again, knowing the next few days would be different for both of us. Looking back, I should have known that sometimes the universe sends a cold front just to shake things up, to remind us that patterns, no matter how comfortable, are meant to be broken. But sitting there that Friday morning, watching her move with purpose through her threatened garden, all I knew was that something was about to change. The temperature plummeted as Friday wore on. By evening, the weatherman's predictions had proved accurate, maybe even optimistic. I'd spent most of the day half working, half watching through the office window as my neighbor secured her garden against the cold. Each time she'd emerged to adjust a protective cover or check a plant, her movements had grown more hurried, less graceful than usual. I was about to call it a day when movement caught my eye. There she was by her pool, wrapped in a thick white towel with what looked like a swimsuit underneath. Even from here, I could see she was shivering. She stood at the pool equipment panel, jabbing at buttons with increasing frustration, her breath visible in small clouds against the darkening sky. Something in me shifted. Before I could think it through, I was already heading downstairs, grabbing my jacket from the hook by the door. The wooden deck boards creaked under my feet as I crossed Uncle Paul's backyard, drawn toward the fence that separated our properties. "Hey," I called out softly, not wanting to startle her. "Everything okay over there?" She looked up, clutching the towel tighter around herself. Even in the fading light, I could see the goosebumps on her bare shoulders. Her teeth were chattering slightly as she answered, "Oh, hi, I'm just trying to get this stubborn pool heater working." Of all the nights for it to act up, it was the first time I'd heard her voice directed at me instead of carrying over the fence during her phone calls. It had a warmth to it, despite her obvious discomfort, that made me want to hear more. "That's rough timing," I said, moving closer to the fence. With the temperature drop and all. She took a few steps toward me, and I noticed her lips had a slight blue tint. "I know it sounds crazy, but I always swim on Friday evenings. It's my way of starting the weekend." I thought if I could just get the heater going. She trailed off, looking back at the control panel with a mix of frustration and resignation. The words left my mouth before my brain could catch up with them. "You know, there are other ways to stay warm." As soon as I said it, I felt heat rise to my face despite the cold air. It wasn't what I'd meant to say, or maybe it was exactly what I'd meant to say, just not what I'd planned to. There was a weighted pause as my words hung in the space between us. Her eyebrows lifted, but not in offense. Something else flickered across her face. Surprise, yes, but mixed with what might have been amusement or interest or both. She shifted her weight slightly, adjusting her grip on the towel, and I felt my chest tighten at her reaction. The moment stretched between us, charged with possibility. I could feel my heart beating faster, though whether from the cold or the boldness of my words or her response to them, I couldn't tell. The evening air had grown colder still, and I could see her trembling despite her efforts to hide it. We stood there at the fence, my impulsive comment having transformed the space between neighbors into something else entirely. The familiar distance we'd maintained through weeks of window-framed observations had vanished, replaced by an immediacy that demanded some kind of resolution. Her discomfort from the cold created a natural urgency, but neither of us seemed to know quite how to proceed from here. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. The pool water lapped quietly against its edges in the background, the only sound breaking the tension-filled silence between us. I still can't quite believe how smoothly I managed to turn that charged moment at the fence into an invitation to come inside. The words had tumbled out naturally, something about having hot chocolate that would warm her up faster than any pool heater. She'd hesitated for just a second before nodding, and here we were. Now she sat at my uncle's kitchen island, wearing one of my dark gray hooded sweatshirts. Her hair was still damp from her abbreviated pool attempt, leaving darker patches on the fabric around her shoulders. I tried not to stare as I moved around the kitchen, gathering mugs and cocoa mix from the cupboards. I feel a little ridiculous, she admitted, tugging at the oversized sleeves. Barging into a stranger's house in a swimsuit and borrowed clothes. You're not barging, I said, measuring. Hot water into the kettle. And we're not exactly strangers. I've been watching you garden for weeks. I winced as soon as the words left my mouth. That came out creepier than intended. She laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the kitchen. No, I get it. I've seen you too, working at that upstairs window. Though I didn't know you were house-sitting until tonight. The kettle clicked off, and I poured steaming water over the cocoa mix, stirring each mug carefully. Yeah, it's my uncle's place. I've been here about 3 weeks now. I slid one mug across the counter to her. He travels a lot for business. And what do you do? She asked, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. When you're not spying on your neighbors, that is. I felt my face warm at her teasing tone. Graphic design, mostly. Though right now I paused, searching for a better way to say unemployed. Between jobs, the startup I was with folded 6 months ago. Ah, startups, she nodded knowingly. I've consulted for enough of them to know how that goes. I'm Sophia, by the way. I realize we skipped that part earlier. James, I offered, leaning against the counter across from her. You're a consultant? Marketing strategy, she confirmed, taking a sip of cocoa. Mostly tech companies, helping them figure out how to talk about their products like actual humans. Instead of robots, her eyes crinkled with amusement. It keeps me busy now that the kids are both away at college. I found myself studying the way she held her mug, her fingers long and elegant against the ceramic. Both in college? That must be quite an adjustment. It is. The house feels too quiet sometimes. She glanced down at her cocoa. Especially since the divorce was finalized last year. But it's also been, she searched for the right word, freeing, in a way. I took a solo trip to Portugal last spring. Just packed a bag and went. Her whole demeanor shifted as she talked about her travels, becoming more animated. She told me about getting lost in narrow cobblestone streets, about a tiny cafe where the owner insisted she try every pastry in the display case, about watching the sunset from a rooftop in Porto. I found myself leaning closer across the counter, drawn in by her enthusiasm and the way her hands moved as she spoke. The conversation flowed effortlessly, jumping from travel stories to work experiences to favorite books. Despite the obvious age gap between us, there was an ease to our interaction that made the time slip by unnoticed. When she finally glanced at the clock on the microwave, surprise crossed her face. Oh wow, I've been talking your ear off for 20. She said, though she made no move to leave her seat. I should probably head back. The trailing end of her sentence felt like an invitation to object. I watched as she traced the rim of her empty mug with one finger, her reluctance to end our unexpected connection mirroring my own. You could stay, I heard myself say. For dinner, I mean, if you want to. She looked up at me then, and something passed between us in that moment, an acknowledgement that this wasn't just about dinner, that we were choosing to extend whatever this was between us. The pause before her answer felt weighted with possibility. I'd like that, she said finally, her voice soft but certain. I'd always felt most comfortable in a kitchen, and tonight was no different, except for the elegant woman perched on a barstool, watching me dig through my uncle's surprisingly well-stocked pantry. How do you feel about pasta? I asked, emerging with a box of linguine and some dried mushrooms. I make a decent white wine sauce. Sounds perfect, Sophia said, rolling up the sleeves of my borrowed sweatshirt. Put me to work. I'm not much of a cook, but I can follow directions. We fell into an easy rhythm, me at the stove reducing wine and cream while she chopped garlic and fresh herbs from the windowsill garden. The kitchen filled with warm, fragrant steam as pasta water came to a boil. Every few minutes, one of us would need to reach past the other for a utensil or ingredient, creating small moments of proximity that felt both casual and charged. So tell me more about the startup, she said, sliding chopped parsley my way. What happened? I stirred the sauce, gathering my thoughts. Classic story, really. We had a great product idea, custom typography software for designers, but terrible timing. The funding dried up right as we were about to launch. I tasted the sauce, adding a pinch more salt. 6 months later, I'm still trying to figure out what's next. That's a lot of pressure at 25, she observed, leaning against the counter beside me. Sometimes it feels like everyone else my age has it figured out, I admitted. Like there's this timeline I'm supposed to be on and I'm falling behind. She made a thoughtful sound, reaching across me to lower the heat under the sauce. Can I tell you something I wish I'd known at your age? When I nodded, she continued. Those timelines are mostly illusion. I spent my 20s and 30s checking boxes I thought I was supposed to check, only to realize at 49 that it's never too late to redraw the map. The pasta was ready. As I drained it, she grabbed plates from the cabinet, her movements in my uncle's kitchen already feeling natural. Is that what the divorce was about? I asked carefully. Redrawing the map? Partly, she said, accepting a filled plate. We'd grown in different directions over 20 years. When Emma, my daughter, left for college, we couldn't pretend anymore that we were staying together for the kids. She paused, studying me over her wine glass. Emma's 22, by the way, not much younger than you. There it was, the age gap acknowledgement we'd been dancing around. I met her gaze steadily. Does that bother you? Does it bother you? She countered. I considered this as we settled at the small kitchen table, our knees almost touching underneath. I'm more interested in who someone is than when they were born, I said finally. You're easy to talk to. The rest feels secondary. Something softened in her expression. We ate for a few minutes in comfortable silence, broken only by the clink of forks and the quiet hum of the heating system fighting off the unusual cold snap outside. This sauce is incredible, she said, reaching for her wine. Her fingers brushed mine as I passed the glass, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Family recipe, I smiled. One of the few useful things I learned from my dad before he and Mom moved to Arizona. The conversation flowed effortlessly through dinner and dishes, our bodies finding natural ways to occupy the same space. When the kitchen was clean, neither of us suggested ending the evening. Instead, Sophia glanced at the coffee maker with raised eyebrows. It's not that late, she said, though we both knew it was well past 11. Coffee sounds perfect, I agreed. Already reaching for filters. We could move to the living room. It's more comfortable. The smaller space of the living room seemed to concentrate the warmth that had been building between us all evening. We sat at opposite ends of the couch, angled toward each other, steam rising from our mugs as midnight approached. Outside, the temperature continued to drop, but inside, each hour felt warmer than the last dot when the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 12. Sophia blinked as if waking from a dream. I should probably head back, she said softly though. She made no move to stand. I need to check that pool heater in the morning anyway. First thing tomorrow? I asked, trying not to sound too eager. She smiled, finally rising. Well, I might need coffee first. Say, 9 o'clock? We both knew the pool heater was just an excuse to continue whatever had started between us, but neither of us called it. Out, sometimes the best parts of connection are in the things left unsaid. Saturday brought more sunlight than expected, though the air still carried an unseasonable chill. I found myself back at Sophia's pool, this time on the proper side of the fence, crouched next to the heater while she held the manual. I swear this thing worked perfectly last week, she said, flipping through laminated pages with growing frustration. Though I suppose anything could have happened in the 2 months since Richard moved out. Your ex wasn't much for home repairs? I asked, examining the control panel. She laughed, a warm sound that seemed to cut through the cold air. Let's just say his expertise was limited to ordering takeout and calling repairmen. The one time he tried to fix the garbage disposal, we ended up with a flooded kitchen and a $400 plumber bill. I smiled, focusing on the wiring connections. Well, at least he tried. That's generous of you. She stepped closer, pointing to a diagram in the manual. Does this part here match what you're seeing? Her arm brushed against my shoulder as she leaned in, and I noticed her fingers trembling slightly against the page. Without thinking, I reached up and caught her hand in mine. "You're freezing," I said softly, my thumb running across her cold knuckles. Instead of pulling away, she let out a small breath. "The sun's not doing much today." I turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in mine. They were like ice against my skin, and I began rubbing them gently, trying to work warmth back into her fingers. "Better?" She nodded, but didn't speak. I could feel her pulse quickening under my touch, matching my own heightened heartbeat. When I looked up, her eyes met mine with an intensity that made the cool air around us seem to vanish. Time stretched and compressed in that moment. The pool heater hummed uselessly beside us, forgotten. Birds called from somewhere distant. But all I could focus on was the feeling of her hands warming in mine, and the way she hadn't moved away after what could have been seconds or minutes. Sophia gently extracted her fingers from my grasp. She cleared her throat softly. "Maybe we should call someone about the heater, a professional." "Yeah," I agreed, though we both knew the broken heater had become an excuse rather than the point. Probably smart. She took a small step back, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't really feel like cooking tonight. I was thinking of ordering in, maybe that Thai place on Mason Street?" The invitation in her voice was clear, and my response came without hesitation. "That sounds perfect." Though I glanced at her house, remembering how cold it had been the previous evening. "My uncle's patio is covered, and he has those standing heaters. Might be more comfortable than trying to stay warm in here." "Your uncle's patio sounds lovely." Her smile held a hint of relief, as if she'd been worried I might not want to continue whatever was building between us. 7 o'clock? "I'll have the heaters running," I promised Dot as I gathered my tools and headed back toward the fence gate. I could feel her watching me. The tension from our shared moment still hummed in the air, making even this brief parting feel charged with possibility. "James?" she called just as I reached the gate. When I turned, she was hugging herself against the cold, but her expression was warm. "Thank you for trying to fix it." We both knew she wasn't just talking about the pool heater. "Anytime," I replied. Meaning it completely, I watched her disappear into her house, before heading back to my uncle's patio to start preparing for evening. The temperature was supposed to drop even further tonight, but somehow I didn't think either of us would notice the cold dot the patio heaters cast a warm glow across the covered space, creating pockets of comfort against the deepening chill. Sophia settled onto the outdoor couch, tucking her legs beneath her as she poured us each a glass of the wine she'd brought. The Thai food containers spread across the low table filled the air with fragrant steam. "I hope you like red," she said, passing me a glass. It felt like a red wine kind of night. Perfect choice. I accepted the glass, noticing how she chose to sit closer to my end of the couch than necessary. The heater above us hummed softly, and I could smell her subtle perfume mixing with the evening air. We talked easily through the first portions of dinner, but I sensed something shifting as we finished the food and moved on to our second glasses of wine. Sophia's gaze grew more distant, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "Can I tell you something?" she asked finally, her voice quieter than before. "Something I haven't really admitted to anyone?" I turned toward her, giving her my full attention. "Of course." She took a slow breath. "It's strange how invisible you become after 40, not all at once, but gradually. The way men's eyes just slide past you in restaurants or stores. Like you've crossed some invisible line into irrelevance." She smiled, but it held a touch of sadness. "I used to think I was ready for it, that I wouldn't care. But I do." The vulnerability in her confession made my chest tighten. I wanted to reach for her hand but held back, letting her continue. "And this," she gestured between us, "it's complicated. Emma, my daughter, she's 22, not much younger than you. I keep thinking about what she'd say if she knew I was here." "I understand," I said softly. And I did. The age gap between us wasn't something I could ignore either, but it didn't change how I felt. Sophia turned to face me more fully. Do you? Because sometimes I wonder if I'm being completely foolish, letting myself feel. She trailed off, leaving. The thought unfinished. The wine had loosened something in me too, and I found myself wanting to match her honesty with my own. Can I tell you something now? She nodded, her eyes meeting mine in the warm light. I'm 25, and I feel completely unmoored most days. Everyone expects you to have it figured out by now, career, direction, purpose. But I don't. The startup folding hit harder than I expected, and sometimes it feels like I'm just drifting. That's perfectly normal at your age, she said gently. Maybe, but there's this constant pressure to prove otherwise. I set my wine glass down, needing her to understand what I wanted to say next. But here's the thing, Sophia. You're the least invisible person I've encountered in months. Since the first time I noticed you through the office window, I couldn't stop watching. The way you move through your garden, how your laugh carries across the fence. You command attention without even trying. Her eyes widened slightly at my directness, a flush rising to her cheeks that wasn't just from the wine. I've been drawn to you since that first glimpse, I continued. Not because you're trying to be seen, but because you simply are. Completely and authentically yourself. James, she whispered, and I could hear surprise mixed with something deeper in her voice. I know what I want, I said, the words coming easier now. I want connection with someone who doesn't judge me for not having everything figured out. Someone real. She shifted on the couch, her knee pressing against mine. Neither of us moved. To break the contact. And what I want, she said slowly, is to feel desired again. To be seen, really seen. Her eyes held mine. To matter to someone who sees me as I am now, not as some category or number. The space between us felt charged with possibility. Her knee remained warm against mine, and I could feel each breath. She took in the silence that followed her words. You matter, I said softly. You've mattered since before you knew I existed. The empty wine bottle stood sentinel between us on the low table, catching the patio heater's glow. Our conversation had meandered through depths and shallows, each revelation drawing us closer. The evening air had grown colder, but I barely noticed, too aware of how Sophia's knee still pressed against mine, how her hands moved gracefully as she spoke. I found myself watching her lips as she finished a story about her first solo gallery visit after the divorce. The wine had softened everything, the light, our inhibitions, the space between us on the couch. Her eyes caught mine looking, and instead of glancing away, I held her gaze. Sophia, I said, my voice quieter than I'd intended. I'd really like to kiss you right now. The words came out with more steadiness than I felt, carried by wine-warmed courage and hours of building tension. The silence that followed felt endless. She went completely still, studying my face with an intensity that made my chest tight. Those dark eyes searched mine, looking for something. I couldn't read her expression, and doubt crept in. Had I completely misread everything? The weight of presumption settled on my shoulders, and I started to lean back, creating space. Wait. Her voice was soft but firm. She shifted to face me more fully, one hand settling on the couch between us. I need to know something first. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I need to be sure this isn't just curiosity about being with an older woman, or a convenient distraction for a cold weekend. Because I can't. She took a breath. I can't afford to be someone's experiment. The seriousness in her tone demanded equal consideration. I let her words settle, really thinking about what she was asking. The wine made everything feel more immediate, but it also made honesty easier. It's definitely curiosity, I admitted, watching her expression carefully. But it's curiosity plus about 12 other things I can name right now. I turned more toward her, wanting her to see the truth in my face. I'm attracted to you, physically, yes, but also to your mind, your grace, the way you tell stories. I admire how you've rebuilt your life, how you face uncertainty with such openness. And beyond all that, I genuinely like your company. A lot. A lot. I reached for her hand, encouraged when she didn't pull away. There are other feelings too, ones I can't quite put into words yet. But this isn't an experiment, Sophia. You're not a category or a convenient opportunity. You're just you. And that's what draws me. She was absolutely still as I spoke, her eyes never leaving mine. I could feel her searching for any hint of insincerity, any crack in my conviction. I held her gaze steadily, letting her see whatever she needed to see. Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes, a slight parting of her lips. Before I could process the change, she was moving forward, closing the distance between us with deliberate grace. Her free hand came up to touch my cheek, and then her lips were on mine. The first contact was tentative, questioning. Her lips were soft, barely pressing against mine, giving us both a chance to retreat. But when I responded gently, matching her careful pressure, she sighed against my mouth. The kiss deepened naturally, both of us relaxing into the connection we'd been dancing around for days. When we finally parted, she didn't move far. Her hand was still on my face, thumb brushing lightly across my cheekbone. I kept my eyes closed for a moment, memorizing everything about this instant. The warmth of her touch, the lingering taste of wine, the soft sound of our breathing. In the night air, we sat in charged silence, neither rushing to speak. The kiss hung between us like a declaration, acknowledging everything that had been building since that first cold evening by her pool. Her fingers traced down to my jaw, then fell away slowly, but she didn't move back to her side of the couch. The patio fell quiet after our kiss, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Sophia's hand found mine on the cushion between us, her fingers intertwining with mine naturally. The heater hummed above us, fighting against the deepening chill of the night air. I should probably head home, she said softly, though she made no move to get up. It's getting late. I glanced at my phone. 11:23. Late, yes, but not so late that the evening needed to end. The thought of her leaving made my chest tight in a way I wasn't quite ready to examine. We could watch a movie, I suggested, trying to keep my voice casual. Inside where it's warmer. If you want to. She turned to look at me, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. A movie? Her eyebrow arched slightly. Is that what we're calling it? Actually watching a movie, I clarified, though I couldn't help returning her smile. My uncle has a ridiculously comfortable couch, and I promise to be a perfect gentleman. She studied me for a moment, then squeezed my hand. Lead the way. Inside, the warmth wrapped around us immediately. I gestured her toward the living room while I grabbed water for both of us. We'd had enough wine for one night. When I joined her, she'd already settled into one corner of the sectional, looking perfectly at home. I sat down with what felt like a respectable distance between us, though even that felt too far after the intimacy we'd shared outside. We chose a film neither of us really cared about, some indie drama that would serve more as background noise than entertainment. 20 minutes in, neither of us could have said what was happening on screen. The careful space between us had gradually disappeared as we shifted closer, drawn together like magnets releasing their hold. Her head rested against my shoulder, and my arm had found its way around her waist. When she tilted her face up to look at me, I couldn't resist kissing her again. This time there was no hesitation, no careful testing of boundaries. Her lips parted under mine, and I lost myself in the warmth of her mouth, the soft sounds she made when I pulled her closer. This is crazy, she whispered against my lips, though. She didn't pull away. You're 25. And you're gorgeous, I murmured back, kissing the corner of her mouth. Age is just a number. She laughed softly, pushing back just enough to look at me properly. That's such a young person thing to say. Her fingers traced along my jaw. I have a daughter who's 23. I know. I caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. And I know this isn't conventional, but it feels right, doesn't it? She nodded slowly. It does. That's what scares me a little. She took a deep breath. I haven't been with anyone since Thomas left. Over a year of nothing. And now suddenly there's you, making me feel things I thought I was too old for. I haven't felt this kind of connection with anyone since Sarah in college, I admitted. Maybe that's why the age gap doesn't bother me. You're just you, and being with you feels natural. Her expression softened, and she leaned in to kiss me again, deeper this time. My hand slid into her hair, loosening what remained of her bun, until it fell around her shoulders. She made a small sound of pleasure that sent heat through my entire body. We should probably talk about boundaries, she said breathlessly, even as she pressed closer. For tonight, I mean. I forced myself to focus, to think past the intoxicating feeling of her in my arms. You're right. We should take this slowly. Slowly, she agreed, though her fingers had found their way under the edge of my shirt, tracing patterns on my skin that made it hard to think. No rushing into anything physical, just this. Kissing, talking, being close. Perfect, I said, meaning it despite the desire humming through my veins. We have time. No pressure. The movie played forgotten as we lost ourselves in more kisses, in quiet conversations about everything and nothing. The hours slipped away until the sky outside began to lighten imperceptibly. I really should go home this time, she said around 3 a.m, though she was still curled against my side. We're spending tomorrow together, right? Before your uncle gets back Monday? Wild horses couldn't keep me away, I assured her, walking her to the door. She kissed me one last time, long and sweet, before stepping out into the pre-dawn darkness. Good night, James. Good night, Sophia. Sunday dawned with the kind of grayness that makes you want to stay in bed, wrapped in warmth and denial of the coming week. When my doorbell rang at 10:15, I found Sophia holding a cardboard tray of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like heaven. We stood in the living room, steam rising from our cups, neither of us quite ready to sit. The temporary nature of our situation felt heavier in the morning light. Tomorrow my uncle would return, and this borrowed intimacy would have to find new shapes. Do you regret anything? She asked directly, her eyes searching mine over her coffee cup. About this weekend? I considered her question carefully, wanting my answer to hold the weight it deserved. My only regret is waiting until Saturday to kiss you. Her laugh was softer than usual, more private somehow, and it made my chest ache in the best way. We need to be careful, she said, stepping closer, with both our hearts. I'm 49, James. You're still finding your way. Instead of answering, I pulled her into the kitchen. Let me show you how I really make coffee. She followed, setting her cup down. Though I warn you, I'm a design guy, not a barista. Oh no, she smiled, taking the French press from my hands. This is where I teach you. Watch and learn. We spent the morning trading lessons, her precise coffee ritual for my stumbling explanation of design software. Each demonstration became an excuse to stand close, to guide hands, to share breath. The house felt different with her in it, like it had been waiting for this all along. Neither of us mentioned tomorrow. Some questions are better left unasked, at least for a little while longer. As dusk settled, Sophia rubbed her arms and glanced toward her house. My heating's acting up too. I tried adjusting the thermostat earlier, but she trailed off, and I caught the subtle shift in her expression. You should stay where it's warm, I said softly, letting the words carry their full meaning. She met my eyes directly, a long moment of consideration passing between us. I was hoping you'd offer, she replied, her voice carrying gentle certainty. We stood close in the kitchen, the air between us charged with shared understanding. I need you to know, I began, this isn't about your age or novelty. I'm drawn to you, specifically you. And I need to be sure you won't wake up tomorrow with regrets about being with someone older, she countered. I led her down the hallway to the guest room, our footsteps quiet against the hardwood. Nothing felt rushed. Each movement carried the weight of choice rather than urgency. We sat at the edge of the bed, the lamplight casting a warm glow across her features. I haven't felt this wanted in so long, she whispered, her fingers finding mine in the dim light. I'm nervous, I admitted, squeezing her hand. But I'm sure about this, about you. Her eyes met mine, and all the complexities of age and circumstance fell away. We had chosen this moment, chosen each other, and that was all that mattered. I woke to golden morning light filtering through Uncle Paul's guest room curtains. She was already awake beside me, propped on one elbow, watching me with gentle eyes. My old university t-shirt draped perfectly over her curves, and her dark hair fell in adorably mussed waves around her face. She looked softer in the morning light, almost girlish despite the silver strands catching the sun. "Hi," I whispered, reaching up to touch her cheek. She leaned into my palm, turning to kiss it. "Hi yourself." We shared slow, sweet morning kisses, neither wanting to break this peaceful bubble. When she finally slipped out of bed to make coffee, I watched her move through the morning ritual she'd taught me yesterday, the precise French press technique that now felt like an intimate secret. Between us, she brought 2 steaming mugs back to bed, then glanced at her phone. "I should probably head home before the neighbors start their Sunday routines," she said, though her amused smile suggested the neighborhood gossip wasn't really a concern. At the knitstand, she picked up Uncle Paul's notepad, scribbling her number even though we'd already exchanged texts about the pastries yesterday. Something about watching her write those digits made everything feel more real, more permanent than just a weekend fantasy. She dressed unhurriedly while I stayed in bed, memorizing every detail. Her goodbye kiss was deep and promising. After she left, I lay there holding the notepad, breathing in the lingering scent of her perfume on the pillows, mentally composing the text I'd send once enough time had passed. If this story found you at the right time, subscribe and set reminders. Tomorrow's might be the nudge, the hug, or the promise you've been waiting for.